Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who was last seen floating in a lagoon off the coast of St. Sinistra.
Tim Longo. Yeah, I definitely was that person from time to time.
A few times, probably floating in off the coast of St. Sinistra. Deep people who have a very good memory may remember what that's a reference to. We are continuing a little series, a short series here at the beginning of the year, where we discuss the flexibility of text. When we decided to play Rogue.
That's Brett's white paper that he's writing.
Yep. As it were, yeah. I decided we should spend a little time on other just text games that kind of were pushing the envelope in different ways and how they tie to modern games. With Rogue, of course, as Calamity Nolan pointed out, we could have played basically any game to follow it up because so many games are influenced by Rogue today. But with this one, it's this one we're going to discuss tonight, which I guess I'll announce now. It's called Plundered Hearts. It's a 1987 Infocom game. It's their only romance that they ever published. And gosh, I didn't look to see if it was the only one principally developed by a woman. I suspect it probably is, although I should have probably checked that before I make that statement. So maybe I'll try to look that up while we're chatting. I had chosen this one because Reed Knight, who we had on the cast for TIE Fighter, had sent in a newsletter entry by Aaron, I believe his name is Aaron Reed, who did 50 Years of Text Games as a Substack a year or two ago. And at the time I thought, oh yeah, you know what? If we ever go back and play a text adventure, that might be one to talk about. It's going to be a little bit delicate for us to talk about because there's definitely some things that this thing does that are, they're problematic. Let's say. Let's just say they're problematic. So it's going to be, we will be tiptoeing around. Anyway, let's start out by setting it in context. This was 1987. You have a whole bunch of games there. You want to start throwing some out there?
Yes. Just scrolled away from my list. We have Maniac Mansion. Yes. Some that sort of like are extremely relevant, of course. We have Maniac Mansion. We have on the Sierra Online side, we have Space Quest 2, Police Quest 1, Leisure Suit Larry, everybody sigh.
Yes.
So, it's interesting in the context of Infocom, right?
Yes.
And so we see these sort of this crossover timeline of this company that was, top of the heap for a while, and now it's sort of, on its way, potentially declining, trying to stay relevant. And then all the other games I just mentioned are all graphic adventures and the ones that I really embraced myself. But on the Nintendo side, we have Punch Out. In Japan, we have Final Fantasy 1. We have Sid Meier's Pirates, which is obviously
not an NES title. That would have been. I
switched back over to switched back over. So some good Nintendo. Oh, actually, back to Nintendo. I missed Metroid, Legend of Zelda in the American Europe. But yeah, so you have some of those classics on the console side coming out, led by the NES era of that stuff, and then you have graphic adventures really leading, as we know, in this era. Graphic adventures when we played Space Quest and King's Quest, we talked a lot about. That was 83. Was that right? Am I thinking that right? Maybe 86.
A little bit, yeah, around that time. I think 86 maybe for Space Quest, but maybe earlier for King's Quest. I know King's Quest had a number of iterations. Yeah. They had a bunch of games. Those weren't even their first graphic adventures, but they were starting to become more a little richer in terms of their representations. Maniac Mansion. We both had an opportunity to play when we played Day of the Tentacle, since it's on the computer inside Day of the Tentacle, you can play Maniac Mansion. I booted it up, but did not play much of it. Just kind of was like, oh, this is cool that this is in here. Just embedded inside another game. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, definitely Infocom had lost its relevance. At this time, they were also fooling around with implementing some business software. They really...
Yeah, that's right. They had that whole, which I think
it was a
actually,
database program.
Yep, and Reed has it. Reed he bought it because he wanted it as a keepsake. Yeah,
I'm gonna look it up because I can't remember the name of the software. But that's basically what ended up taking the Cornerstone, ended up taking the company down, basically a year or two after this. Infocom died as an actual developer in 1989. So this is very late in their development history. Zork came out in 1980, and then in 81. And if I had realized this, I might have chosen this title instead, because I did not recall it being this early. 1981 had Deadline, which was another very flexible text adventure, because it was it was very similar to a lot of text adventures in that it took a lot of iteration to puzzle out this mystery, which takes place over the course of, I think, 24 hours or something like that. There's also The Witness a few years later, which is another one in the same sort of style, but you could not possibly solve it in one go. It was sort of a game where you had to, things were happening in real time as you moved around, and so you had to kind of play it multiple times to see things from multiple angles.
To get information you needed to
get the information you had to even solve it. So you had to play it again and again and again. It was almost roguelike in that way, except it was one story, but in multiple locations. You could only be in one place.
Sounds like Deathloop, almost.
It is, yeah, it's sort of like Deathloop in that way. Yeah, it's super interesting game. I played it once back in
Deadline, the original Deathloop.
Yeah, in the 90s, and it's super difficult. It's a very, very difficult game. Probably not something we could actually do in just one or two episodes. Because it's just the effort to get everything in it would be very, very without a walkthrough. I guess you could just jump in and use a walkthrough these days. And The Witness was sort of similar, but they were always exploring a little bit different sorts of things, but their bread and butter had been the sort of fantasy genre with Zork and the Enchanter series and things like that. They had these games that kind of had worked really well for them, were the children of Advent, and really kind of fit into that. But they had also done, had done The Lurking Horror and Ballyhoo, which was set at a carnival. Moon Mist was another sort of not terribly difficult late sort of light horror game. They had Leather Goddesses of Phobos, which was sort of a satirical comic sexual oriented game. They of course had the extremely ridiculously difficult Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy adaptation of the Douglas Adams novel, which has I only ever played it as far as getting the thing put in my ear, the translating thing. I forget what that's called. It's been so long since I read that book. But the sequence of events to get that thing and put it into your ear, it was a game where you died basically on every turn, but it had a really, really advanced help system. So you could basically ask for enough help at every stage of the game to get through it, but not that playthrough. So it's you'd get to a point where you'd go, help me, no, help me more, no, give me another hint, and it would finally give you enough information to solve it, but that would kill you. So you'd have to go back and
my God,
and get to that point. It was remarkable,
taking a lot of
extremely
notes.
Funny. Yeah. It was very it was quite a game. It's quite a game. I played that infuriatingly up through that puzzle and said, if it's all like this, I don't want any more. I can't do it. By the time I played that one, it was very late. I actually had gotten a number of these as parts of collections because Activision acquired the IPs and released in the 90s the Lost Treasures of Infocom as a couple of box sets with just all of the games and all of the manuals like in a book, and hint books as well, and things like that. So there was all of it was there, but I don't believe Plundered Hearts was one of them. So we played this through the Internet Archive, where you can actually download. You can play it right there, or you can actually download the data file and play it in something like Frotz or some other Infocom playing game. Anyway, yeah. So it's an unusual game, and it's we're playing it because of how flexible the format is. It's, I think, playing with some of the fact that it is in that format, while still being a romance game, and it is. I mean, from its very opening, it's very much like you can see the cover with I don't know, Fabio on it or something of the book.
Yeah.
So it's definitely leaning into that as well.
Yeah, it's a romance novel. As soon as you see the cover art, you know exactly what it is. That swashbuckling. I mean, we'll get into some of the problematic nature of it, but the swashbuckling, Errol Flynn, whatever, Fabio, the romance novel feel of it. And I mean, I think it's quite good. I did finish it. I did use a couple hints on some things that I just was like pulling my hair out. Yeah, don't even. I didn't tee you up for anything there. Pulling my hair out on.
You're like the least Fabio person I know. But okay.
No, I just mean pulling my hair. I don't have. Okay. All right. Anyway,
I got that too. Yeah.
No, so I did. Yeah, so I did. Full disclosure, use a couple hints, for sure. And I remember, so I think Zork 1's the only text adventure I ever finished. And even that, I probably used some sort of hints on back in the day. And once I discovered, and we talked about this probably at length in the Sierra Online games that we played, so go back and listen to that series if you so choose. But once I had discovered King's Quest, I was like, no, never looking back. So
yeah,
and Reed has always been obsessed with these, and you've always talked about them, obviously being a huge reader anyway, and so sort of like a sweet spot of Venn diagram there for you. But for me, like all of the other ones, other than Zork, like I had no exposure to. Right, I knew they existed. And in retrospect, like something like Deadline or something sounds super fascinating, especially after finishing this one, which I had kind of 2 weeks to play it versus Brett, who had to, basically lost a week. So I'm a little bit ahead there, but I mean, we don't have to jump in now, but just so many elements of this game in particular, as far as structurally and the way that it plays out, has like really convinced me of what you and Reed always talk about with these. There's just, it's so kind of, again, with some of the subject matter. I mean, in a way, to be honest, like if you intend to play this game, I think we would probably have to give a trigger warning to
absolutely
people.
Yes.
So be aware. I'll just say pirates are not good people at their core.
Yes.
And we kind of know that historically.
These are not Guybrush pirates.
No, this isn't Sea of Thieves, folks. So that being said, it's just so richly written. There's so much that happens. It is very much that, it feels like that swashbuckling kind of adventure. You can see the movie in your head, as it's playing out. Especially the ending, it just feels like, wow, like she just hit. We're talking about Amy Briggs.
Yes.
She just hit every note in this genre, both from a romance novel perspective, but also just from how to leverage this medium as a text adventure. So, I don't know when I'll get a chance or if I will ever. I always threaten to do things that I never do on this podcast, but something like Deadline. So is Deadline a murder mystery? What is its genre?
It is.
Okay.
It is. It's a murder mystery. Both Deadline and The Witness are murder mysteries in which my recollection is that they play out over the course of I think all 24 hours, and they're basically like cozies, right? They're basically like
cozy
mysteries, British cozy style, where you've got this colorful cast of characters, like Agatha Christie or or anything like that.
My wife's
And you've got
currently
this
obsessed
Ruth.
with Murder, She Wrote. So yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So very, very much in that vein, and but it plays out sort of as you move. Time is passing. I think every movement is like 1 minute or 3 minutes or something like that. So you can go to a location and wait, and like you could probably play that game. It would be very inefficient by going to each location and just waiting through the whole day and just seeing who comes in and goes out.
Wild,
and
wild.
just
Make notes.
and yep. I mean, and what you're trying to do there at any given point is gain the knowledge, Tim. Trying to get the knowledge.
Yeah.
See, or you could do something like you might do at Sleep No More. For those who've had the opportunity to see that or have heard of it, which is a sort of a theater experience in New York. I don't know if it's still running, but where it's a whole building and it's immersive. The actors are there in these like this whole built environment they've made, and they're basically, I think, doing Macbeth. But not in any way you'd recognize it. It's kind of the story of Macbeth, but not staged in any way that feels like Macbeth. Super interesting experience. But you could do what I've done when we went to Sleep No More, which was try to follow particular actors around for a while until they basically go off stage. They have in Sleep No More, they have places where they can leave the set basically so that they can appear somewhere else later. And there's sort of a whole backstage that covers this whole building as well so that they can appear on different floors and things. And so you can sort of play Deadline that way as well, where you sort of maybe you just want to follow characters around and see what they do all day, but following them will change what they do. Because you're observing them. So it's extremely complicated
rough.
game.
Yeah,
it is a really, really difficult game. That was sort of the model, right? At the time was because they weren't really, if you knew the answers, they're not really that long.
Pretty fast
of games. Yeah, you could. If you had a walkthrough, it would take. It's just the reading, right? So it's like if you just knew what to do at every step, it would take you an hour or two at most, absolute most, to play through most text adventure games. So the trick was, how do you construct that thing so that there's a challenge there? And you sort of learn skills as you play text adventures of the sorts of things you do. So I actually, having not played one in a while, we played a tiny little bit of Advent or Adventure, the Colossal Cave Adventure.
Yeah.
But having not played them in a long time, it was definitely reminding me like every block of text you need to read and look for clues of things that you might want to try.
Yeah.
And you need to try all those things, and every now and again, you probably want to save. You could save these games. And just restore them. And I think you have a number of save slots, is my recollection. Can't do that if you play it through the Internet Archive. You're stuck starting over, I believe.
No, I was able to. I played it that way.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I don't. It must have put a save file somewhere on my machine,
somewhere in your cache. Okay, yeah. That's cool. So that's a great.
Yeah,
that's great that
but also you can save with an ABUG, so it doesn't always. You could discover later,
right?
Like,
oops,
this save,
I needed a thing.
I totally didn't bring that with me. Whoops.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that was a problem with a lot of the Sierra games. That was really, as we talked about when we talked about Day of the Tentacle, that was the LucasArts, real innovation was to make it that there are no ABUGs. That you can't get to the end of the game. But these definitely had them. No question. There was things could happen in Zork where it's like something happened in the first, few minutes that meant you were not going to be able to get the maximum score in the game. You had to make sure that you were always doing the right thing. And you might not know until you got to the end of the game that you couldn't do the thing. They are definitely those kinds of games. And that's what the audience wanted from them at the time. It's definitely a flavor of game we don't enjoy so much anymore. As we've gotten, much more mass market, you have to remember the audience at the time was basically hobbyists, with home computers, who were likely to be programmers or at least, dabbled in that. They just had a certain, they were engineers often. You bought an Apple II. It was, it came with the total electrical diagram of how the machine worked. I mean, that was the environment we were
in case you need
to
fix it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. It was like buying a Volkswagen Bug, right? Or a Volkswagen van of the 70s.
Yeah.
That you could literally just look at the whole circuit diagram and be like, oh, I see, the whole thing. They were remarkably sturdy machines. I never had to repair it, but it was super interesting looking at the whole diagram of how a whole computer worked. So yeah, there's a lot of puzzles. There's a lot of wordplay. There's a lot of figuring out the parser, what the parser wants from you. You can also see the designer's hand, because the designer is much like, I believe we talked with Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman, and they would talk about, well, you would have the pizza orgy, and you would try to see what people did and make sure you responded to those things. That was also true of the text adventure, although I don't think it happened in quite the same way. I'm sure there was internal playtesting, but I don't think there was a lot of wider playtesting, and the company was quite small.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, hear me out, but my pitch is modern day text adventure, Dark Souls. Okay. And obviously where I'm going with that, but it's like when I was playing Plundered Hearts not using hints in the, I don't know, probably, I'll be honest, I probably used maybe half a dozen hints at places, because there's definitely some real like head scratchers for me. I'm like, I just am not seeing something. Specifically one, because I know where you got to cutting the rag to to put out the fuse versus having a bottle with you that you find. You're like, nope, the bottle's it. I'm putting the bottle in the water. No, you can't use that there. No, I'm putting the bottle in the water. It's like, no, it's not the answer. I'm like, what is the answer? So but anyway, just the sense, like you already made the joke of like information, it's all about learning. It's all about gaining knowledge about the game, but it felt run based, because of the structure of the game. And then I'm thinking about Tomb Raider, and you mentioned that in pre-show, but I'm thinking about Tomb Raider as far as like, just this sense of exploring and kind of like, pushing on the boundaries of what the rules are and figuring out what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go, when to do those things. The structure and the flow of it is, I mean, yes, you could say, okay, this is like a choose your own adventure game book, or what were the fighting fantasy? What were the fighting fantasy?
Yeah, wasn't it fighting fantasy?
It might be. It might be. Yeah. Anyway,
I never played any of those, so it's not on the tip of my.
Yeah, I had a couple of those. They weren't actually, ironically, Ian's, but I had a couple of ones that were, I don't even think.
Yeah, it is fighting fantasy.
Yeah. So those sorts of things, right? Where it's like, it's still a book, but it has multiple different permutations and stuff. So the structure is the same there. But if I just take the books out of it for a second and just think of game structure, like there's a lot of genesis of things in text adventures. And I think because I both don't remember Zork and I think it's a little more straightforward is my memory. Or not straightforward, but like linear-ish. This one, just the permutations, are. I guess it just surprised me at how, like you said, how flexible it really is, and how much it accommodates different experimentations that you will attempt. Because it tries to predict what you will try and what you, and then later on, there's some great things with the poisoning of drinks that plays upon tropes and expectations to kind of trick you into thinking you're smart, and then kind of it doesn't end up being the solution, but they accommodate that because they assume people will do it, and you do it, and you're like, you give the drink to the wrong person, and then this happens, and then you die, and it's okay, well, of course I thought I was clever, but they thought about that, so it's like I must have to do something else with the drink. So I was just happily surprised at like, I guess I missed the boat on this way back then and didn't commit.
You see what you did there.
And my unintended puns are just never. Yeah. Anyway,
So it's one of the things that I think, so one of the things that so we should talk, I guess, a little bit more about the parser and the mechanics, and then maybe we can dive into the actual sort of bits of the story, and we can talk about some of the stuff that's a little triggering. So we'll make sure that we throw that out there before we get into it. It is it is an Infocom game. It's a game that has a score, and as we mentioned, there's a parser. All of Infocom's games were written in an internal language that was built for it. It was called the Z interpreter. I think it's just Z interpreted language or something like Zork interpreted language, something along those lines.
Yeah, I just looked it up actually. Yeah, as we were talking, and that's correct, I think.
Yeah, it still exists today. As I believe Inform, the last version I saw was Inform 7. That's like a decade ago or something that I saw that. It's still maintained. There's still people writing games in the Inform language. There's still people writing games in Tags, which is the adventure game studio, and other languages as well, and including modern, less parser appropriate games like Twine systems. So the text adventure has continued, and another variant, actually a more modern variant, is Ink, which is used by Inkle Studios to make things like Around the World in 80 Days, probably most famously, but also their games Sorcery 1, 2. I don't know. There were at least 2. I think there may have been as many as 4 on phones. Those may also be on PCs at this point. It's just another text interpreted language. In their case, it's more choice based. I think one of their more recent games is like Astrolager or Astrologer and something like that. It's sort of a space archaeology game. Very strange, interesting kind of game. I can't remember the name of it exactly.
It's text, you're saying?
Well, they use text and graphics, but it is under the hood. It is a text, primarily a text format, and you program in fairly natural-looking language. And Inform's language looks, ZIL or Inform 7 or whatever, is pretty similar in that way. They connect rooms. There's sort of some primitives that are like the locations, that you see when the parser prints out are basically rooms. So if you are, in the captain's quarters or you go to the crew quarters, you see when you're moving around in the world, you'll see a room and it'll do some text description, and that can change based on variables like, what's been dropped here and things like that. But typically it's like a title for the room, and then a description of the room. And then after that will appear game state that the parser is keeping track of for you. So if you drop an object, what you'll see is captain's quarters, blah, 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 description of the captain's quarters, and then game state that you have changed will be the last thing that appears. So, and then it can respond to specific verbs. So you could say, look at things, examine things, are two very common things to kind of like understand more about what's going on in the world. In most games, in most of their games, you would move north, east, west, south, up, and down. This one, I thought, amusingly, at least on the ship, and that's most of where I spent my time, you had fore and aft, which is really a really nice ship-centric way of navigating the world.
I didn't use those. I mean, I still use the usual. I guess.
Oh, you use north and south?
Yeah. I just use the regular.
Oh, okay, interesting. So it assumed that forward was probably north.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, because the captain's quarters would be at the rear, at the aft of the ship, like the rear, underneath the.
Yeah, I didn't even think to use boat terms, but it has a lot of boat terms in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, and in fact describes when you go down the stairs to the hold. It describes something being, that you can go fore and aft from here. So I started going fore and aft. I did go north out of the cabin, now that I think about it, out of habit. But then when I went down, I noticed that the text was saying fore and aft, and I started using fore and aft.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just to keep track.
Cool, yeah.
That was neat. Yeah, neat. Anyway, so you have these ways that you can navigate the spaces. You connect between rooms. You have an inventory. and those are kind of like the building blocks upon which everything rests. That's pretty flexible because those rooms can be very abstract. In some of their other games, they have one, and I can't, I'm going to have to look up the name of it, but there's one in which you control several robots.
What?
What is that called? That's not I have it. That's I have no mouth. No, that's not it. That one. Oh, it's called Suspended. You're in suspended animation, and you're connected. Excuse me, that's my phone. You're in suspended animation, and you can connect to these like 4 robots, one of which can like lift things, and one of which can see things. It's 6 robots, and they all have different abilities: sight, sound, hearing.
So you're saying like move robot X north and
exactly
then commanding it. Wow,
you command the robots, and that game is hardcore. I thought Deadline is hard, but I now remember I didn't make it through Suspended. That's one of the early ones as well. 1983.
Well, and they had classified, which we were talking about in pre-show. They had classified their games by difficulty as well. So which I didn't remember, but I assume like Zork might be an easy one, but we were looking up.
Yeah, Zork is standard difficulty.
Standard, yeah. So
yeah, but they have their easier games are there's one called Wishbringer, which I don't know if that's part of. I didn't play that one. I don't know if it's part of the Enchanter series. It doesn't look like it. Written by Brian Moriarty.
Wow! Yeah,
he worked at Infocom back in the day. And then you go to something like Hitchhikers. They say it's standard. The only reason it's standard difficulty is because the help system will get you through everything if you want it to. But yeah, there's some very abstract games like A Mind Forever Voyaging, which is you're a sentient machine.
Wow,
it's a whole. Yeah.
Well, it's just to your point, like your earlier thesis. It's like it's just so flexible when you just. It's just writing, and you can be so
building blocks of a couple of things, and then responding to whatever verbs and objects that the implementer programmed in, which could be anything, like any word, right? I mean, there's a limitation. There's a hard limitation of like how many characters it can be, and I can't remember if it's like 4 letters or 6 letters that it doesn't just distinguish between. So. There's some that are shortcutted. Directions and like inventory, examine, I think are all have shortcuts. There's probably a shortcut for quit. I don't remember all the shortcuts. There's probably save is just save, I think. But it's like if it's longer than 6 letters, all it cares about is the first 6 letters. So those 6 letters have to be unique for the words that used. I think it's 6. I can't remember because it's been so long since I've looked at the parser. But that's, I mean, the worlds that they're able to conjure with that are quite varied and extensive and complicated. Deadline is one of their expert games, and having beaten that one, I can say. Yes, it is. I played that on vacation, and it was all I played on that vacation. I hardly read any books because I was playing Deadline.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, speaking to your point about the game state saving or the way the parser used game state and with inventory specifically, there was a mind blowing because I guess I don't think there's a reason up to that point to put anything down. I mean, I know you can do it, but I never had done it. So like objects being on the ground were not really a thing. But there's a point there where they force you late in the game, like toward the very end, where you drop all of your stuff because of something you do. And you have to remember to pick it all up, of course. And so when the description of the room is like the room and then like 10 things that are just laying there, and I guess they have a get all all command, so you can pick everything up. So it's just like it's such a simple thing, but for the game and for what these games are and for the era and stuff, like I don't know, it was just a little mind blowing to me that Spoiler, there's this swashbuckling moment where you're climbing down a rope from a chandelier and you slam into somebody. So I'm giving you a hint if you ever do play it.
Okay.
And
Thank you. I will. I will make an effort to finish it this week.
And you slam in, and then through that process you drop everything, and so it's just I don't know. It's just to the point of flexibility. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. That they actually thought to accommodate that, because they didn't have to do that.
Yeah, and that's why I've often joked that for me, text adventures had the best graphics, because of course you're reading this stuff and it's conjuring in much the same way it does when I read. It's conjuring the events that are happening, and like your mind is doing the thing that it does where when you read, that you're simulating all the things that you're reading. So there are some people who don't do that. Like there's a specific. Like some people don't visualize things in their mind when they read. There's a specific. It's not really a condition. It's just that some people don't do that. It's a substantial percentage of the population as well. Like way higher than I thought, and I don't remember the number, but I remember reading that, going, "No way!" Like that many people don't. Because as a person who reads, it's just
I'm definitely
amazing to me that people.
A much more visual person than I mean I do enjoy reading, but it as like the comparison between you and I is like night and day. And when I find those books that I really are engrossing me, then I get into it. But like I said earlier, once the graphic adventure came out, it was like it was all over for me. But with this one, like it's every like the last half of the game is so compelling, and and that my other joke about Dark Souls is that it does, and you mentioned it too, it does feel very run based, because it's like it's quote unquote a perfect run, right? Finishing the game is a perfect run,
right?
Because you're doing everything you're supposed to do, you get max points, and then you finish it. And so that perfect run is just like this breakneck running from room to room, swashbuckling, people. And then depending on if you fail or not, people are dying. It's something else. And the fact that it is so like envisioned in my head when I see it all happening. And there's some great pirate tropes in there. There's bad, terrible pirate tropes as well. But they're a magical thing that I just know so many gamers have no concept of what they are or that they exist, or even what influence they really had,
right. Right. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, they continue to be a genre today, although they're a free genre effectively. I mean, there is a contest every year. I think we may have mentioned this when we talked about Advent. There are the XYZZY awards every year for text adventures, and they are extremely clever. I mean, they are. You can go look that up and like look at the like top handful of games every year. I think they usually have like a top 10, and they're all extraordinary games. And
it's like that Rogue Festival that
exactly.
That
I mean, the
listener sent.
Yeah. Yep, there are definitely. It is a continuing genre. It is still a lively genre. There is still innovation in it, which is remarkable. And it's just so niche. And there have been companies that have tried to to capitalize on it, but it just hasn't. It's just not. It's not what gamers want, and it's very hard to reach. The sorts of players that would enjoy these games. Emily Short is very involved in these. It's a great place she does research and game development in interactive storytelling. She's done a ton of them. They're very interesting. And she's also, done platforms where she's done really, really interesting things. And that has informed other indie games as well that are not primarily text-based, but still have sort of adventure game feeling. So I'm thinking of things like Elsinore and things like that. So it is this is another type of game, maybe not this game specifically, because commercially it was not successful. But the flexibility of it means that it's had a very, very long tail, and it has its devotees even today. It's something that I like dip into every handful of years, where I'm like, I wonder what's going on over in text adventures these days, because there's always something really, really interesting, and it's really, I mean, it's like reading. It's like you could go to the library and find something exciting on the new bookshelf, any week of the year.
Yeah.
For me in fiction, but I mean, I think in general, that is true. So I think we should, we've talked a lot about sort of text adventures and sort of the mechanics here, and the general, facilities that the thing and how it was developed and all of that stuff. We should talk a little bit about the content specifically before we turn to reviews and stuff. So we got hit trigger warnings here, I guess. And if you're listening with children, it's maybe not the time to continue listening with children in general. I mean, we're not going to be filling it with expletives all of a sudden, but we are going to be talking about some adult themes. So a little warning for that.
Yeah.
But this is, as you pointed out earlier, these are pirates, and they're not the friendly pirates of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride or movies. These are, are more realistic in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're pirates. It's, I mean, I think she did a good job at that romance novel pulp, most of the time, but she also didn't shy away from, I mean, first of all, the other thing I think we should say is that we're two dudes talking about subjects. The main character is a woman, as is probably obvious at this point, but maybe we didn't explicitly mention it. And she is the heroine, and she basically does the job by the end, and and vanquishes everything, and wins the day, of course. But along the way, pirates putting women in bad situations, and in our household we don't even use the word, but we say the R word. There are you can imagine some of the in a genre where the flowchart of the game results in failure, right, throughout the game, and all the different ends of different things you try, and only one of those is success. All the failures in a pirate game where the woman is a protagonist, you can imagine where it goes a lot of the time. There's plain old death by sword or whatever, throughout, guns, etc. But there's also, as Amy Briggs writes, fate worse than death happens. And so I just, when Brett suggested it, and we were talking about it from Reed's suggestion, as soon as I started it, I texted Brett. I was like, holy, are we sure about this? And I think Brett, was right in saying it's something that we should talk about, because it's a female protagonist, which in this, not only in this era, but also in this company, in this genre, sounds like wasn't common.
Very uncommon.
A female developer, which was also, probably
equally uncommon.
Rare, yeah. So there's a lot to talk about there, and then the fact that she didn't pull her punches, in the way that she wrote the game with this subject, and so I mean, I don't even know exactly what to say about that, but that's brave as well,
Yeah. I think it may in some ways be an approachable commentary on what it's like to be a woman even in the modern world. The world is dangerous for women. I mean, this is something that, and I don't want to get too down and all of that, but it is something worth addressing. This is not something I ever, like, as you already pointed out, we're two dudes, two white dudes at that. And it never occurred to me to think about how dangerous the world was for women, in our culture, or just in general, in the world today. And of course, this is set, whatever, 150 or 200 years ago. It's certainly worse. But I think that this, is putting you up against the sort of mechanics of the adventure game and saying, at every turn, there's a bad ending, but the ending, as you pointed out, is much worse because you're a woman. in this scenario. And you kind of only, I think in some ways, as you pointed out, there's one path through this game that doesn't end in something horrible. And I think that might also be a commentary, by its designer. I mean, we don't know. I haven't read enough to discover that she thought that way or anything like that. I'm presupposing some of that, but it feels true to the material to say that to me.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, I think we know, like you said, we have a few tidbits on sort of her approach and, wanting to play a game that, this is a game that she wanted to play, and it's about romance, which I think was the only one of theirs, right? That was about this. And so there's a lot of like there's a lot of well done elements of putting an unorthodox or not unorthodox, but just rare theme into a context of this genre or this gameplay genre that was very fresh and unique. And so there's that side of it. But also pirates. I mean, I've put a lot of time into Sea of Thieves, myself, like hundreds of hours. And we have gotten to this point where, it's just such a romanticized thing. So I don't know, because her goal was romance novel. It wasn't about commentary on pirates, but there is a reality, right? That Pirates of the Caribbean, the movies, the ride, whatever, none of it. And that's actually there's been controversy with that ride, as you may know, where they did. Oh yeah, they had to change they changed it, and Disney is to blame for some of that romanticism. But yeah, not good. Well, I mean, I guess there's even Assassin's Creed has pirate stories, but
yeah, but we sanitize them, we romanticize them, and this just takes on fully, what that environment really entails, in some sense, right? And through the failure states, but also just through the sense of threat. I mean, it is there is that sense of danger, even in the sort of moments that feel kind of lighthearted. I mean, there's an early, like, I didn't play as much as you did. You got all the way through it, which might be a first.
Well, again, I used hints,
and
so
it's like a text adventure. Like, oh my god! But there's an early scene where the pirate has, the hero pirate, the love interest,
Jameson
has the Falcon. has given you a letter from your father, ostensibly from the main character's father, the protagonist's father. And then afterwards he says, well, of course I could have lied and forged his signature. So even in those moments, which are sort of being light and supportive and warm, there's a sense of like, oh yeah, this could be bad. Like, I mean, it's just even on the sort of up notes that are somewhat more playful and things like that. And that is played a little bit playfully, like he's a playful rogue, or whatever Han Solo type character. When you're taking that from a female perspective, where all the end states are really, really bad, those things don't feel as playful.
Yeah.
And so there's also that going on in this. It is extremely rich, from that standpoint. And it is so rich because of the mechanics of it being a game. Like, if you're just reading that scene in the perfect playthrough and you never see any of the imperfect playthrough, it comes very different than if you see it with the failures.
Exactly. Yeah. The context of the genre of the medium is everything here. It was just much darker. At least the way that I was reading it, it was much darker than I thought it was going to be. But then it's juxtaposed with a lot of that pulp, swashbuckling lightness too. So it's really hard to parse. No, didn't mean that one, but it's hard for me to kind of like push through and analyze for myself, because they're both in there. That there's these quite crazy moments in pre-show. You mentioned, like, the comment of don't go above deck, don't go to the top of the the upper deck dressed as a woman, and it's like, yeah, that's the reality, and that's what women have to deal with.
Minding your own self presentation, and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. So it's hard. Yeah, again, we're not even qualified or equipped probably to talk about it the way we should, but unexpected, and it did. I mean, it made it even more memorable for me, at least. So
yeah,
and it made the 25 out of 25. It made that much more impactful, right? Because literally, she has the final shot.
Mm-hmm.
If you know Amazing. What I mean, right? And and so it's kind of profound.
Yeah. No, it's really really terrific, and as I pointed out, flexible game. So I'm glad you got all the way through it. I will endeavor to do so. We're going to do a bonus episode of a different sort this time. So you'll see that next week, but we will also do our takeaways then, because I think it'll be pretty obvious what a lot of them are, but I will make a real attempt to finish the rest of the game this week, so that I can go toe to toe, cross swords with my co-host maybe at that point about that. But for now, I think I'd like to turn to some reviews. We actually had 2 reviews this week, nice. Which is amazing. I think they had actually both come in last week. Those were sent through the Apple infrastructure. If you use some other podcast service that has reviews and you put it there, awesome. Thank you so much. Maybe point us at them or send them in and we can read them as well. But I do get most of I get all the ones written at least in English to the Apple Store through a bunch of weird RSS feeds. Anyway, why don't you, sir, read the first one?
All right. From Vermin?
From Vermin.
Yeah. All right. Hello, Vermin.
Very appropriate for our pirate text adventure.
Unique insights into video game design from Vermin the Wepper or Weep. Yeah, I've never known. I need to ask him. He comes onto the stream often, and I've watched his stream. 13. There's a
if that is your real name.
If that is definitely. We just call him Vermin. I don't. Every time I say it out loud on stream, I'm like, does he want us to just say Vermin? I don't know. It's like, I guess so. There's simply no other podcast like DGC. Well, that's quite a nice thing to say. 2 experienced video game developers analyzing influential and new video games to draw out what makes them great. That was point 1. Point 2, he bullet pointed them. Point 2, amazing interviews with developers of classic games, giving a behind-the-scenes insight into how seminal titles came into being. And then point 3, Tim and Brett engaged with the pod community, answering listeners' questions, partaking in Discord chat, and streaming. If you're interested in game design or development, check this out. You won't be disappointed. Thanks, Tim and Brett, for your efforts. Thanks, Vermin.
And thank you, Vermin. Was he the one doing the SL1?
I watched him. I watched him SL1 Artorias. And Gwen, and
I also watched that. He clipped that and put it in the Discord. Yeah,
I was live for Artorias. Well. I was live for that because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see him do it live. And amazing. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's very cool. I have still not played that DLC, though I haven't now. So join Vermin and the rest of the crew over at the Discord. I'll maybe post a fresh link, but you can find it through the Twitter.
It's quite active. I'm really impressed with everybody.
It is, yeah. I usually have it, open it up and have it open in the morning for a while, and then sometimes in the afternoon, depending on what I'm doing. And it's great to chime in, and it's expanding. Like, they're covering different topics. They got a book channel going now, so of course I'm in there.
Nice.
Things are happening. I have a second review. The subject is the only game design podcast I listen to, and it's from Pippin Barr. I don't know if you know that name, Tim. Pippin is he says himself. I guess maybe I'll follow it up at the end and describe what I remember of Pippin.
Talking about the show?
No, Pippin Barr is that is his real name. He says, I'm a game designer myself, admittedly a weird one, and I've spent a lot of time listening to different podcasts that touch on the subject. Dev Game Club is the only one I still listen to. Tim and Brett just do a really nice job of threading the needle between talking more generally about aspects of game design in the industry versus talking about the real specifics of the game they're looking at. I've learned a lot. More than anything, though, I hugely appreciate the rapport that Tim and Brett have. We're fooling him. And the way they invite the listener into their world rather than flexing their expertise in your face like a giant game design bicep. Thanks, guys. Thighs. So thank you, Pippin. So Pippin is independent.
Yep, I do because I talked to David. We should plug their podcast.
Oh, cool. What is their podcast? I don't know their podcast.
Yeah, so I was just looking it up. They did a season 3, which it's a long story, but it's really kind of a reboot. He and David Walensky.
Dave Walensky, sure. Yeah.
They do a podcast together, and yeah.
Okay.
Keep talking, and I'll find the exact name.
Okay, yeah. So Pippin does a lot of, as he pointed out, a lot of strange games, weird games. I remember he did one about that artist. I think her name's Marina Abramovich. She had an exhibit called "The Artist That Is Present." So that was one of his. So he did like a simulation of that in her exhibit, which was like at the MoMA or something. She sat there and people could sit down across from her and you could just look at it. She would just sit there. You know, she's done other things that were way even further out there, but I remember he did a game about that. I had another one in mind just before the podcast and now I've forgotten it. Shoot. But he's done sort of things like that are definitely a little out there.
Yeah, he's an experimental
definitely
game
very
developer,
experimental, doing very unusual topics. And I've played a number of his games, but it's been years because I used to follow him on Twitter, but now that I don't really do things on Twitter, I've kind of lost track of that stuff. Super interesting stuff. I'm sure he has a website somewhere with them all collected. You should look him up. He used to like contribute or be reviewed a lot in Kill Screen as well, which I think where I encountered a lot of his work.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like that kind of genre or that sort of time in games. For sure. So that is super interesting work. I've enjoyed a lot of his games over the years, and I would recommend if you're interested in that sort of thing, looking him up.
Game Thing. I don't know how I forgot that was the name, but it's Game
Thing.
Yeah, and they have
Breakout. Breakout was the other thing. He did a whole thing about Breakout. Like he fiddled around with Breakout and did like variations on Breakout, and maybe had some other people make Breakout games.
That's cool.
He's done some really, really interesting.
Almost like the performance artist of video game kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really pushing the the limits of things, and a lot of it is very art influenced as well. He had an art gallery simulator thing at one point. I mean, just some really interesting, really super interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Pippin. It's really, it's really great to hear from you.
So they check out their podcasts. I think that we have a lot in common. They're good thinkers, and David Walensky, if you don't know his site, Don't Die, for over 10 years, I think he's been doing oral historian interviews with game developers, a lot of them, and they're amazing. So yeah, if you don't know David Walensky's work too, check both of them out.
Yeah, and I guess I should note that I was actually interviewed by Dave early on, maybe in one of the first handful of interviews I did with him way back, like 2013 or 14, something like that. So it has been going for a while. I will also look up their podcast because I could use some of that. Okay, let's try to hit. I guess we have time for one email. Yeah, we got time for one email.
Over to me.
Over to you. You should have one there.
I do. Okay. Subject: Rogue to Diablo from Father Beast. I played Rogue as the game of the quarter for the Classic Gaming Podcast, free plug, and I didn't enjoy it at all. In at least a third of my runs, I starved to death. Yes, that's true. Even the time I found a ring of regeneration, I ended up starving to death. I didn't know at the time that such a ring increases your food consumption, that there's Yeah, I didn't know at the time that such a ring increased your food consumption. Oh yeah, he needs the other ring. So I was constantly fainting from hunger and would pass out during fights, which I would still survive because of recharging hit points. It was very frustrating. Anyway, I remember that Diablo was originally going to be another turn-based roguelike before it went real time, so I can see a lot of influences in Diablo that Rogue had. Number one, movement is combat. In Rogue, to attack a creature, you walk into it. Simply in Diablo, clicking on a thing means you either move to it or attack it. Number two, unidentified and cursed. All those unidentified items in Diablo, and some of them were cursed. Unlike in Rogue, you could remove cursed items. Number three, unknown things have weird adjectives. Remember the folded scroll or murky potions in Rogue? These still survive in the naming of shrines in Diablo, like the Eerie Shrine or the Glimmering Shrine. These weren't randomized for every playthrough. Weren't randomized for every playthrough, though. Also, it seems to me that the town in Diablo, where you can get stuff identified, repaired, and buy new equipment and supplies, is sort of like any easy mode in roguelike. Diablo would be more rogue if it was just going into the dungeon and finding potions and equipment to help you along and never going back to town. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a challenge in the old Diablo community. That would be cool. That's a great idea. As for me, the roguelike I will likely go back to is something called Ragnarok, which was freeware for DOS in 1992. There's a lot of games called Ragnarok in some way, but Googling Ragnarok Valhalla roguelike was usually
not Valhalla, vanilla.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it says vanilla, doesn't it?
Well, it says Valhalla here, but he might have meant vanilla.
No.
Yeah.
No. Maybe he meant Valhalla, and I read it as vanilla.
Oh, okay. You really want it to be Ragnarok vanilla. Yeah. In Ragnarok, you can eat the monsters. What? You kill?
Yeah.
So food isn't as big of a problem. Oh, well, that's quite a solution. Of course, some of them are poisonous, or it can cause you to mutate or something. It has graphics and a mouse interface, but still almost no sound. It also allows you to save your game, although it deletes your save if you die. I love it. Oh, Rogue.
Rogue does too.
Yeah.
Game in Rogue.
Yeah, right. I intend to save scum my way through the game, backing up my saves by simply copying the directory. Father Beast. Wow, Father Beast. That was quite an email.
Yeah. I do like one of the things I should point out, I did get around to listening to Glenn Wickman talking to the Eggplant Show, which I think was still the Spelunky Show or the Spelunky-like show or whatever it was called originally. This interview is from a few years ago, and he specifically mentions he gets how Diablo went from being turn-based to real-time like that, because he was like, oh yeah, it's just natural. You can imagine it didn't actually take that much work. You just run everything continuously instead of one step at a time, which was it was really interesting to hear him say that. I totally see how you get there, and it's not that hard, really, relatively speaking, which is also what he said when he was on our show, Dave Brevik. Yes, thank you. Yeah. I'm like Dave. Mm-hmm. About Diablo is that it worked in a matter of a few hours, and it sort of makes sense. But yeah, it definitely, you can see the origins there. And of course, Dave Brevik also talked about how it was way more like a Rogue game when they built it, that it was originally way harder core. It's got to have permadeath. I think he said, he was convinced that was key to the experience, which I totally get. If you're coming from a deliberate Rogue background, it totally, absolutely makes sense that would be the case. So.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Well, they have hardcore mode, so it's there's still a bit of a nod to it. If you want to do that. Is
that in the first one or just in the later ones?
No, it is. I'm pretty sure.
It is.
Pretty sure. Yeah,
I remember because we didn't play it that way.
Yeah. But I think to Father Beast's email, we did talk about a little bit, but and he mentioned Ragnarok. You mentioned, I haven't done the research on it, but you mentioned that just since Rogue, like Moria, and there's been so many diffs, or I guess NetHack as well. There's been so many diffs off of the Rogue formula, and some of them even had towns and vendors and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So
overworlds and
so I mean, like, to Calamity's joke, it's like once the fractal effect coming off of Rogue is just so infinite. It feels like, of so many different variations. So
it's definitely a template that you can imagine putting all kinds of things on top of. And we also mentioned in that email from Oliver of, Brogue and Caves of Quid, I guess. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, Quid. And Cogmind, I think, was the other one that he had mentioned, and like that there are conferences. I mean, it is, the roguelike is, or the rogue direct descendants, have their own, some niche followings. It's something, because it is something you can develop sort of as a solo developer, and take, if you're enmeshed in that community, and you can sort of like go and dive in, and look at all of that, and try new things, like come up with your own ideas, say, oh, I really like this piece of this one, I really like that piece of that one. And I sort of like see how Diablo went from the turn-based thing that it had started as to a real-time thing, but also had those other rogue elements in it, obviously the procedural generation, but permadeath, in his original thinking is super amazing. So thanks for the email, Father Beast. That, of course, was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. And we appreciate all the emails we get. I have one other one. It's super long, so we're not going to get to it tonight. I might even have to cut it down a little bit. Keep in mind, once you get past a certain length, it's like, hey, maybe consider your own podcast. Because it's like, wow, this is going to take me 3 minutes to read. But we try to fit them all in. And if we can't fit them in, I usually reply to folks. Anyway, so thank you for those. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at least for the moment,
Tim Longo with a JR at the end. Yep. I haven't been on lately, but
still there a little bit. And of course, you can find him twitching at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr., where he is currently in Dark Souls 2. I forget the name of the world in Dark Souls 2, but you're out there making the world safe.
Yeah,
I guess.
Is that what you're doing in those games? I don't think that's really what's happening.
No, not really what you're doing.
So yeah, it's fun. It's it's an interesting follow up to one. Still think one is a masterpiece, but but two has definitely got some interesting things going on.
Yeah, for sure. It is really worthwhile to play them all three right in a row like that, to see the differences. I did the same last summer, so I definitely recommend it. I might soon start twitching as well at Brett Duville. If I do, I'll be finishing off Rogue Legacy. I have 5 of those estuaries down.
Whoa! Really? Yep. Holy cow, you have been
continued playing. Yep, and anyway, you'll find us there. We're also on Discord. We have a Dev Game Club Discord that was set up by Mark Garcia and others. Thanks so much for that. There is a link to that, as well as our merch store, also run by Mark, and on the Twitter handle. If you look at the pinned tweet and that one and one of the following links in the replies, you can find all of that stuff. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, as well as all of that other stuff, is by Mark Garcia. Have fun learning what it feels like to be a cannonball this week, and good night.
Whoa, you can do that? Good night!